Throughout his life, Franklin's governed by sexual passions, he says.
We're not talking about a guy who's some moral superstar here.
Franklin wasn't above engaging in dirty tricks against his opponents.
And if he could be said to have a great failing, I think it's probably in his family relations that it's most clear.
For more than 200 years, Ben Franklin has inspired and confounded us. He has been analyzed, criticized, and scrutinized by an army of biographers. Yet the essence of the man remains elusive.
Benjamin Franklin's the founding father who winks at us. You know, he lets us in on the joke a bit.
Ben Franklin, it turns out, is everything we think he is, and a lot more that we never imagined. For someone who has been a national icon for well over 200 years, Benjamin Franklin remains surprisingly enigmatic. His long public life and prolific writings present us with a maze of different personas. At times, Franklin is diplomatic, at others, skeptical. He can be flirtatious, wary, conciliatory, witty, or maddeningly patient. He is rarely stubborn, usually wise, often candid, and, whenever necessary, artfully evasive. The doorway into this hall of mirrors is Franklin's autobiography, which he began writing at the age of 65.
The autobiography tells us not who Franklin was, which is how many people have read it, but how Franklin saw himself, and more importantly, how he wished others to see him.
Benjamin Franklin was the first great publicist and image maker in America, and the greatest image he created was of himself.
And I think that Franklin is a master of masks. Franklin understood that American life is one great masquerade ball.
Benjamin Franklin arrived at the party in January of 1706. He was born in a modest home in Boston, Massachusetts, the 10th boy of 17 children. By the age of 16, Ben was already showing a genius for subterfuge. An apprentice printer, he was indentured to his brother James, publisher of a newspaper called the New England Courant.
He wants to write for his brother's newspaper. But his brother's an older brother and, you know, sort of jealous. So James Franklin is having none of that. So Benjamin Franklin has to disguise his handwriting and slip these essays under the door under a pseudonym. And here's a kid who's never left Boston, writing as if he's a widowed older woman from the countryside named Silence Dogood.
He's adopted the persona of this middle-aged woman, and he's able to carry it off so convincingly that it fools his own brother.
I have now remained in a state of widowhood for several years, wrote Mrs. Dogood, a state I never much admired. I could be persuaded to marry again, provided I was sure of a good-humored, sober, agreeable companion, but one even with these few good qualities being hard to find, I have lately relinquished all thoughts of that nature. The public was delighted with Silence Dogood. James, however, was not amused when he learned her true identity. In the end, Ben ran away from his apprenticeship, his family, and Boston. He ended up in Philadelphia.
Benjamin Franklin was a runaway. He was a fugitive from his apprenticeship, which made him a fugitive from justice. And Philadelphia was a place that took in people like that and allowed them to find a niche and to flourish.
At the time of his arrival, Franklin does not exactly exude an aura of success. He's 17 years old. He has no job, no prospects, and just enough money to buy a few rolls of bread. It happens that he strolls past the home of a young woman named Debbie Reed, who is destined to be his wife.
And according to the story that he tells, she was standing in the door of her father's house on Market Street when this rather scruffy-looking character walks past with his dirty linen hanging out of his pockets and munching on a couple of rolls, which is all he had money to buy for breakfast.
Franklin described the scene in his autobiography. She, standing at the door, saw me and thought I made, as I certainly did, a most awkward, ridiculous appearance. It is difficult to imagine George Washington or Thomas Jefferson portraying themselves in such an inglorious farce.
He's very self-aware, very introspective, but he finds himself amusing in a way. And you can see the old man writing the autobiography and being amused by his younger self. So it's a very funny guy who's looking at himself and laughing part of the time.
There was plenty to laugh about. For 7 years, Ben knocked around Philadelphia and London, working as a journeyman printer and getting in and out of scrapes. He feuds with an overbearing employer, makes a play for his best friend's girl, and gets stiffed on a few sizable but ill-considered loans.
His endless brushes with human nature through the first section of the autobiography, that is one long account of America's first juvenile delinquent. And he scams other people scam him, and out of all of this, he comes away with a very considerable appreciation of what you can expect from others and a very considerable self-knowledge.
It is during these early years that we first encounter Ben's enduring enthusiasm for the company of women.
You know, we often think of Benjamin Franklin as this doddering old sage. But when he was a young tradesman in Philadelphia, he was, quite a good-looking guy. He was 6 feet tall. He was a great swimmer. He lifted weights. He loved dumbbells. He was, had a big, broad chest. Women, fell in love with him all the time. So he was a great hunk back then when he was in Philadelphia.
By his own testimony in his autobiography, Franklin had a lively libido. And before he was married, he consorted with what he called low women. He was evidently engaged with prostitutes.
Ben put it this way: that hard-to-be-governed passion of youth hurried me frequently into intrigues with low women, which were attended with some expense and a continual risk to my health.
And he reports to us that it's a stone miracle that he didn't come down with syphilis or some other venereal disease.
He didn't recommend it to people, but on the other hand, he didn't especially condemn it in himself. He recognized it was part of human nature, at least his human nature.
Franklin was all too familiar with his nature, both strengths and weaknesses. During those first years in Philadelphia, he had embarked on a quest for what he called moral perfection.
He compiles from his reading a list of what he accepts to be 12 common virtues: modesty, frugality, industry, moderation, temperance, chastity. And then he defines each of these terms and sets for himself the task of conquering each one in the course of a week.
He even makes a chart where he lists them all and marks how well he does, and it's industry and frugality and all these virtues.
I think he was hopeful that he could be incrementally better, that it wouldn't do any harm to have a little bit of a run at modesty. It wouldn't do any harm to have a little bit of a run at temperance. He never says, lay off the sauce. He always says, less.
In his autobiography, Ben admits with some bemusement that the project was probably doomed from the start. While my attention was taken up in guarding against one fault, I was often surprised by another. Habit took advantage of inattention. Inclination was sometimes too strong for reason.
When he finally gave up on the whole scheme, he realized that if he had become morally perfect, he would have sinned against the last item on the list, humility, because he would have been too full of himself, having achieved perfection.
And as Franklin himself puts it, and this really tells us everything we need to know about Franklin the self-improver, I could not boast of having accomplished humility, but I have made a good stab at putting up appearances.
By 1730, Franklin's virtues, such as they were, and his indisputable talents, had elevated him from journeyman printer to owner of his own shop. Now 24, he was also the publisher of a newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette. With his social position improving, Franklin thought it was high time to settle down, though for more than the usual reasons. His intrigues with low women had resulted in the birth of a son, William. Debbie Reed, who had once been the object of Ben's romantic attentions, was willing to overlook William's origins and Ben's youthful indiscretions. Shortly after the child was born, she and Benjamin settled into a common-law marriage. During the following years, Franklin worked hard and paid dutiful attention to appearances. In every sense, Benjamin Franklin was becoming a self-made man.
He actually did work long hours, but he took pains so that people saw him working long hours. They knew that if they gave a job to Franklin, Franklin would get to the shop early, he would work late to make sure that it was done on time. Franklin recognized that to be a success, he had to be good at what he did, but he also had to be seen to be good at what he did. And he was a master at both ends of that.
He cares about the image. He's always polishing his image. He rolls the carts of paper when he's a young printer in Philadelphia up and down the streets so people will see he's industrious. And throughout his life, he's creating this image of the frugal, hardworking tradesman.
In 1733, Franklin created yet another image for himself as Richard Saunders, publisher of Poor Richard's Almanac.
Now, everybody who cared to know certainly knew it was Benjamin Franklin, but it was a different name. And so when he published as Poor Richard, he could say things that he didn't want to say as Benjamin Franklin. It was as though this other side of Benjamin Franklin was just dying to get out.
Early on, Poor Richard had to contend with a rival almanac that had been established for some 20 years. Ben was determined to take his share of the market.
I don't think Franklin makes any secret of the fact that he's a deeply ambitious man. He's really a bundle of ambition. And he will proceed sometimes in a rather stealthy way to achieve those ends.
Franklin wasn't above engaging in what we might call dirty tricks against his opponents. At one point, he even claimed that a competing almanac maker had died.
The rival publisher, of course, was very much alive, but readers delighted in Ben's irreverence. Readers also loved the regular installments of Poor Richard's Proverbs, sayings that ring as true today as they did when Franklin wrote them more than 2 centuries ago.
Many of Franklin's sayings were the sort of thing that were taught to generations of school children. A penny saved is a penny earned. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Others have not been so commonly repeated because they appeal to an earthier sense of humor. So Franklin had one saying, "Force on reason's back." Well, it's another way of saying might makes right.
Franklin sold a phenomenal 10,000 almanacs each year, a circulation equal to nearly 3 million today. Ben, however, had still bigger plans for his printing business.
Like a great tycoon, he starts franchising these print shops up and down the coast. All of his relatives and apprentices from Boston down to Barbados have these print shops where he takes a 50% equity stake.
He would send out printers, and he would enter into a partnership with them. He would provide the inventory, he would provide the equipment, they would do the labor, and they would split the profits.
Franklin's media empire was a stunning success. From his arrival as a penniless runaway, he had remade himself into one of Philadelphia's most distinguished citizens. Benjamin Franklin's efforts at improvement did not end with himself, however. He would also be the driving force behind radical social innovations that still have an impact on Americans in the 21st century.
An engine that creates more power yet uses less fuel. The world's first blind spot intervention system. Four-wheel active steering. If technology is a measure of luxury, the all-new Infiniti M may be the most luxurious car on the road. This is inspired performance. This is the way of Infiniti. Now lease an Infiniti M for $579 a month.
I will not add an entire wing to my house.
I will simply fix the leaky faucet.
I will go to Ace.
And then I will do Pilates.
Get in, get help, get on with your life. Ace is now home to Craftsman Tools. Ace, the helpful place.
Who's serving up a big breakfast this weekend?
On an endless buffet, a juicy steak.
Don't flip out.
Only Golden Corral would include steak for breakfast. It's on our endless weekend breakfast buffet, all for a great low price. Only at Golden Corral.
Now a history trivia teaser. The invention of the telephone revolutionized communication around the world and made Alexander Graham Bell an international star. When he died in 1922, all the phones in North America were silenced in his honor. This history trivia teaser is sponsored by the University of Phoenix. Learn more at phoenix.edu.
Are you being audited? Have you not filed tax returns for years? Has the IRS come to your home or place of business? The IRS will relentlessly pursue you for unpaid taxes. I'm Patrick Cox, founder of TaxMasters. The former IRS agents and tax professionals at TaxMasters will solve your tax problems. We'll get between you and the IRS. We'll make sure they treat you fairly and treat you with respect. Don't wait weeks for an appointment. Call us today. We'll get started today. Call 800-581-0457. TaxMasters, we solve your tax problems.
My home phone is very important to me. It's something that I have to have.
I like having the convenience of having the home phone, but
why should I pay a lot when I don't use my home phone all that much?
Bundles are a burden.
I, for the life of me, can't even figure out what portion of that bundle is phone.
Keep your home phone. Lose the big bill. Now get nationwide calling for just $9.99 a month. Offer available online only. Go to Vonage.com now.
I mean, that's a win-win for everybody. I'm Cheryl Roberts,
and this is the last bill
I'm paying to my old phone company.
That's where it's gotten to. I have to plan my own birthday party.
You're the only one.
The only one there.
I guess it stopped raining.
Should probably make our move.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you.
Yeah, really nice meeting you.
May 29th. Jason Miller finds out if you want to make instant friends, just add water. Gear up for the great outdoors at REI. Find out. Visit your local REI today.
Surprise! It's Empire's 50th anniversary, but you get the gift. Free installation on hardwood and laminate flooring. Shop at home and enjoy the quality name brands, great prices, and next-day installation Empire is famous for, with no interest for a year. Plus, right now, we'll install your new flooring absolutely free. It's our gift to you. But hurry, free installation won't last long. Call today.
800-588-2300 Empire.
Today.
Stars. This could bring peace to your pawn shop.
I find that hard to believe.
New things.
Did you buy this? It's fake.
More history.
I think the blade is from the late 18th century.
Pawn Stars. Monday at 10 on History. Made every day.
For very many people, Benjamin Franklin is their favorite founding father. I think this reflects the fact that Franklin, in his temperament and his outlook, is the one that's easiest to imagine living at the beginning of the 21st century. George Washington in the year 2004, 2005, that would be a tough one. Thomas Jefferson may be easier. Benjamin Franklin would be really easy.
It's so easy to imagine Benjamin Franklin in modern-day America because modern-day America was markedly shaped by Benjamin Franklin. Franklin's imprint on the civic life of the country can be traced at least as far back as 1727. When he organized a small social club, the Junto. The 12-member group, which met every Friday evening in a local tavern, included a cobbler, a clerk, a cabinet maker, and several printers.
The Junto is a group of apprentices, journeymen, all of them clearly smart, ambitious, young kids on the make, looking to advance themselves in the Philadelphia economy.
Franklin very much believes in self-improvement for what he calls we the middling people. In fact, he says you can't trust the elite or the establishment or the crown to protect our rights. It's up to we the middling people.
You could call it a seminar of self-improvement. The people who were part of this seminar, part of this discussion club, were people who were in a similar situation as Franklin. And for the most part, they didn't have formal schooling, but they were very interested in educating themselves.
That's not to say Ben and his cohorts were all work and no play. The Junto meetings were lubricated with alcohol and punctuated by drinking songs.
Franklin loved to sing. He wrote about 8 songs, some better than others, I have to say. But his favorite activity was sitting in a small, intimate setting with friends of his, a club, a tavern, a living room, and singing with his friends.
In between songs, Franklin and the Junto hatched plans that would change the world. They helped establish Philadelphia's first volunteer fire department and the first non-religious college in America, the Philadelphia Academy. It survives today as the University of Pennsylvania. Among their greatest achievements was the creation of America's first public lending library, the Library Company of Philadelphia. Thanks to the Junto, books would no longer be the exclusive domain of the wealthy and well-connected.
They were simply trying to improve themselves. But in breaking down this fundamental barrier of class that had separated the uneducated from the educated, the wealthy from the people with lesser resources, they made it possible for people like Franklin, who should have had no business engaging in political discussions, philosophical discussions at a very high level, to do exactly that. And it's this class that's going to spearhead the American Revolution in the 1760s and 1770s.
For Benjamin Franklin, the maneuvering required by public life was in itself an education, a master's degree in human nature and gamesmanship. Life is a kind of chess, he wrote, in which we have points to gain and competitors to contend with. By playing at chess, we learn not to make our moves too hastily. Some of Ben's most calculated moves pertain to matters of religion. For starters, he had to learn to navigate between Philadelphia's various congregations.
You've got to understand what the Presbyterians like, you've got to understand what the Quakers like, though the Presbyterians and the Quakers hate each other. And if you're going to be the kind of a cultural broker that Franklin was, you can't be one or the other of those.
Though nominally a Presbyterian himself, Ben had ties to Christ Church, an Anglican congregation. It was all part of the game.
If you go into Christ Church today, you'll see a very large, prominent pew, which is marked as the pew of the Franklin family, which is weird because Franklin was not an Anglican, not an Episcopalian as we would now call them, but Franklin thought that it was politic to have a pew in Christ Church, which was the church of the richest denomination, the most socially prestigious denomination in the city.
Ben's ties to organized religion extended beyond Christ Church.
During his lifetime, Franklin donated to the building fund of each and every church built in Philadelphia. He's one of the largest individual contributors to the first synagogue built in Philadelphia.
He thought religions all did good, and he cared not a fig about their doctrinal differences, but he was perfectly willing to support civic institutions that ameliorated the life of his fellow citizens.
While being a friend to all of Philadelphia's religions, Ben also nurtured his own beliefs.
Franklin was very clear about religion. He feels that there is a God, and God has created the world and is to be worshipped, that the best way one can worship God is by doing good among men.
Doing good was a favorite strategy of Ben's, especially in that murky area where civic duty also promoted personal gain.
Poor Richard had a wonderful saying called about doing well by doing good, which meant you could serve your community but also do well by yourself. And that was really Franklin's creed.
In 1736, a few years after opening his print shop, Franklin becomes clerk of the Pennsylvania Assembly. Through his position, he secures a lucrative contract printing the assembly proceedings.
The standards of conflict of interest were a lot looser back then. I mean, nowadays we're kind of shocked if a Halliburton gets a large number of contracts and works with the government and, you know, looks like insider dealings and stuff like that. But back then it was pretty natural that a person who was a civic leader could also do well in his business through his civic work.
Franklin also served the British Crown as a royal deputy postmaster.
Franklin had the responsibility of improving the postal service throughout the American colonies, and he did a wonderful job at this. The delivery of mail, in fact, around the colonies from Philadelphia to New York in the 18th century was faster than delivery of mails is today.
But Franklin's postal innovations also helped himself. He could now be secure that his newspaper was widely distributed across the colonies.
As the proprietor, the printer, the editor, publisher of the Pennsylvania Gazette, he quite commonly reported news from other colonies. The faster the news got from Boston to Philadelphia, the faster the news got from Charlestown to Philadelphia, the sooner he could get it in the paper and the more valuable his paper would be. The Pennsylvania Gazette became, in essence, the New York Times of its day.
By the time he was 40, Benjamin Franklin was becoming a household name across the colonies. It would be Franklin's discoveries about electricity, however, that propelled him to international stardom as an American Prometheus, the man who tamed lightning.
Yeah, make money for trips, not for sitting around.
How far will Lisa go before she goes too far?
We're going right into the mouth of the monster.
An all-new Ice Road Truckers, Sunday at 9. History made every day.
So word's getting out that Geico can help people save in even more ways. On motorcycle insurance, RV, camper, boat insurance. Nice work, everyone.
Well, it's easy for him. He's a cute little lizard.
Gecko, actually.
With all due respect, if I was tiny and green and had a British accent, I'd have more folks paying attention to me, too. I mean, well, save money. Pip, pip, cheerio.
British? I thought you were Australian.
Well, it's funny you should ask, because actually, I'm from...
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Do you remember when taking a bath and going for a swim became the same thing for a few days? Then keep the tradition going at Bass Pro Shops Family Summer Camp with free activities and crafts. This weekend, kids can paint a free lure for Father's Day.
Looks clean, doesn't it? But look below the surface. Your mouth is no different. Brushing leaves teeth looking clean, but millions of plaque and gingivitis germs are left behind. A quick 30-second rinse with Listerine Antiseptic cleans deeper. Its unique penetrating formula destroys germs, brushing leaves behind. For the deepest clean and the healthiest mouth. Listerine. Clean deeper, get healthier.
Getting an education isn't impossible. I was at 2 dead-end jobs. I was not happy. I didn't wake up happy. I didn't go to bed happy. I knew I had no opportunity for advancement. I knew at that position I wouldn't be able to support a family. I knew I needed to make change, and I knew I couldn't do that without an education.
He made some really good choices.
I've had my education, I've got a job with my education, and I'm happy to wake up and go to work. I'm happy to come home and see my family.
And he is doing exactly what he wants to do.
It might have been a little later than I hoped for, but I was able to complete school while working full-time, while raising a family. It's not impossible. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
We are educators helping people build a foundation for the rest of their lives. ITT Technical Institute, education for the future. Call 1-800-488-3652 or visit us on the web. Get an education that can help you reach your goals. ITT Tech has information on financial aid for those who qualify. Call 1-800-488-3652.
Millions of men 45 and older just don't feel like they used to. Are you one of them? Remember when you had more energy for 18 holes with your buddies? More passion for the one you love. More fun with your family and friends. Could be an easily treatable condition called low T.
Come on, stop living in the shadows. You've got a life to live.
So don't blame it on aging. Go to isitlowt.com to find out more.
I didn't always have such a great credit score. This was us.
For a while there, you were pretty bad.
Mom, get it off! No! Bat 509! I guess it's because I wasn't watching it. Just let it do whatever it wanted. So I went to freecreditscore.com, and with their daily monitoring of my credit report, well, it gave me the confidence I needed to look after my credit score. Who's a good 745? You're a good 745.
Offer applies with enrollment in Triple Advantage.
Ben Franklin hardly qualifies as a hippie. He didn't exactly turn on and drop out, but he did reach a stage in life when he decided to quit working and have more fun.
Franklin is sometimes held up as the archetype of the American capitalist, the self-made man who succeeds in business. And to a certain extent he was, but he was much more than a capitalist. Franklin retired from business at the age of 42. Why? Because he had enough. There were other things he wanted to do with his time.
I shall like to give myself leisure to read, study, make experiments, and converse at large with such ingenious and worthy men as are pleased to honor me with their friendship. Franklin sold his business, keeping a share of the profits to fund his retirement. Then he unleashed his inventive imagination.
Franklin was a great inventor, and it starts as a little kid. He teaches himself how to swim by looking at books about it, and then he wants to swim faster, so he invents flippers and fins and stuff like that. And then even faster, he strips, jumps into Boston Harbor, and takes a kite, so he's pulled across Boston Harbor with a kite.
Franklin's inventiveness, Franklin's curiosity was just like the Energizer Bunny. It never stopped. It was always churning.
Franklin never went anywhere, never did anything without looking around and asking himself, what is going on? Why is this so?
Franklin's questions, and more importantly, his answers, fueled a lifetime of remarkable discoveries. During a transatlantic voyage, Ben becomes curious about anomalies in ocean temperatures and ends up charting what we now know as the Gulf Stream. After calculating the physics of heat radiation and convection currents, Ben designs the most efficient home heating device of the 18th century, the Franklin stove. When Ben becomes fed up changing between reading glasses and distance glasses, he mounts half of each lens in both sides of his frames. He calls the design double spectacles. Today, we call them bifocals. Few inventors can boast such a string of #1 hits. But every now and then, Ben uncorked a complete and utter failure. Most notable, his phonetic alphabet. In Ben's plan, most of the 26 familiar letters are retained. But there are also 6 new letters, among them ing, ish, ed, and eth. This letter to a lady friend is one of the few that Franklin wrote using his phonetic alphabet. Soon after, he dropped the system, much to the relief of those on the receiving end of such messages.
After a while, he kind of gives up on the phonetic alphabet. Noah Webster picks it up, writes some articles about it and stuff, but Franklin realizes that he's never going to be able to push reform that far and get everybody to use a phonetic alphabet.
While the phonetic alphabet died a quiet, merciful death, another of Franklin's inventions was serenading audiences across Europe. Ben's musical instrument was a new spin on an old trick, rubbing the rims of crystal goblets to create musical tones.
What he did was to say, rather than rub your finger around the rim of 25 glasses, why not have the glasses turn and come to your fingers? And that's exactly what he did with the glass harmonica.
This is Ben's personal harmonica, built during the 1760s and housed today at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. Ben mounted 37 crystal bowls on an iron rod, which was then rotated by a foot pedal.
As the bowls turned in front of him, he would wet his fingers with water, and the friction produced by his fingertips on those bowls made that characteristic sound. Of all the things Franklin invented, this was his very favorite one.
While his harmonica brought him widespread acclaim during his lifetime, it was Franklin's work with electricity that would make him a legend for the ages.
Franklin came to electricity at a time when electricity was not quite a science. It was a curiosity. It was almost, well, often was, a vaudeville act.
After seeing one of these shows, Ben was hooked. He acquired this contraption, known as a Hauksbee generator. Its sole purpose was to create static electricity.
This Hauksbee generator is very similar to the kind of device Franklin used to generate electrical charges. This plastic drum will pick up electrical charges from this pad as I crank it. Those electrons will then be transferred through the brass fingers onto the collection cylinder and then out to the distribution point.
The charge can also be directed along a chain to a pair of metal dishes, where objects like styrofoam peanuts rise and fall in response to the invisible flow of electrons. Franklin performed a similar trick using a small spider made of fabric. Through simple experiments like these, Franklin develops his landmark theory of electricity. He begins with an entirely new terminology.
Battery, plus and minus, charge and discharge. Things we normally use every day. Franklin was the first to use these words in relation to electricity.
Franklin's discovery of the single fluid theory of electricity, that electricity is a flow from positive to negative, is actually the most important discovery of that century. It compares to both Newton's theory of gravity in the century before and the theory of transistors and microchips in our own century, because it has very practical implications.
Franklin's most important contribution, however, and the one for which he is most known, was to demonstrate that lightning is, in fact, a form of electricity.
This flew directly in the face of the religious concepts at the time of thunderstorms. Lightning and thunder were definitely acts of God, even punishments of God.
Fires started by lightning could decimate entire towns. Single-handedly, Franklin would find a way to prevent these natural calamities.
Franklin devised a theory of electricity, how the particles in the atmosphere jostling around in a thunderstorm would create these charges, just like the ones in the laboratory. But most importantly, he devised a way to test it.
Franklin publishes his theories and a plan for testing them in 1751. In May of 1752, French scientists, following his instructions, are the first to prove conclusively that lightning is indeed nothing more than electricity. In June, before news arrives from France, Ben is ready to conduct his famous kite experiment. The concept seems simple today. A small wire on the kite will draw an electric charge from the clouds. The charge will then travel down a string to a key tied onto the line.
The small electric spark that he got from his kite through the key definitely showed him that lightning really was just the same static electricity he'd been experimenting with on a small scale, except this scale was absolutely enormous.
Within weeks, Franklin unveils his lightning rod, which remains the reliable way to channel a lightning bolt harmlessly into the ground. At the age of 46, Ben had secured his place in history.
There are a number of legacies left over by the Founding Fathers, but one of the most practical ones is the lightning rod created by Benjamin Franklin. Every building, every edifice in the world that stands at some height has one. And one might argue that without the lightning rod, tall buildings might not have come into existence.
Franklin was the one who, well, as people saw, or put it, tamed the lightning. He stole the lightning from the heavens. After Franklin's researches in electricity became known, he was one of the most famous people in the Western world.
He gets honorary degrees in Edinburgh and then at Oxford and Cambridge and eventually Yale and Harvard in the United States. And thereafter, he kind of allowed himself to be referred to as Dr. Franklin.
Though Ben enjoyed the worldwide acclaim, he refused to patent any of his inventions. He didn't earn a dime from the lightning rod or the stove, and that was just the way he wanted it.
He felt that he didn't need any more money, and it was far more important that he could simply contribute to the well-being of society. The lightning rod, in particular, he felt was going to save lots of lives, save lots of homes and buildings from destruction. It was far more important to him that this invention be disseminated broadly than that he, Franklin, should turn a profit from it.
Ben's discoveries and inventions alone would probably have been enough to guarantee his lasting fame. But Ben Franklin's greatest achievement was still on the horizon. Challenging the political order and establishing American independence would become Franklin's most enduring legacy. Before he could raise the flag of rebellion, however, Benjamin Franklin would have to question his loyalty to the Crown of England. In short, he would have to question himself.
The longbow was the machine gun of the Middle Ages. You will have 30 seconds to fire as many arrows as you can.
This requires more strength, more muscle memory. We're out of our comfort zone.
The Longbow Challenge on an all-new Top Shot, Sunday at 10 on History, made every day.
Imagination. It's the most powerful resource on Earth. And at GE, we're using it right now to create innovative technology that will improve the health of our economy, the health of the Earth, and the health of its people.
I want to ride. I want to ride. I want to ride.
I want to ride.
I want to ride.
It's never been easier to get on a Honda with fixed financing rates as low as 0.99%, up to $2,500 in bonus bucks, and much more. Right now at your local Honda dealer.
My home phone is very important to me. It's something that I have to have.
I like having the convenience of having the home phone, but
why should I pay a lot when I don't use my home phone all that much?
Bundles are a burden.
I, for the life of me, can't even figure out what portion of that bundle is phone.
Keep your home phone, lose the big bill. Now get nationwide calling for just $9.99 a month. Offer available online only. Go to Vonage.com now.
I mean, that's a win-win for everybody. I'm Cheryl Roberts,
and this is the last bill
I'm paying to my old phone company.
How to choose the right car insurance made easy. Start with two identical cars. One covered by a leading insurance provider, the other covered by 21st Century Insurance. Both cars have the same coverage, same low deductibles, and, oh boy, the same door dings. Since both cars are covered, both cars get the same repairs. Here's the difference. Customers who switch over to 21st Century save an average of $480 every year. If you're switching from Progressive or Allstate, 21st Century saves you even more. Why would anyone pay more for the same insurance? Why wouldn't you pick up the phone today and compare for yourself? Call 21st Century at 800-405-5288. A catchy number, 800-405-5288. Or visit 21st.com. 21st Century Auto Insurance. The same great coverage for less.
They itch, sweat, burn, smell. You could have foot dermatitis. It's what Gold Bond medicated foot powder was made for. Medicated to tackle the itch. Keeps feet dry. Look for the healing seal. Gold Bond foot powder. Works as hard as your feet.
With Gold Bond medicated powder, you've got the power of fast, lasting relief from wetness, irritation, and itch. And that Gold Bond Cooling Rush says it's working like ordinary powders can't. Look for the healing seal, Gold Bond medicated, the powder with the power.
We are the face of Comcast.
When you call in, that's me.
If you ever have a problem,
we'll fix it immediately.
If we don't resolve a problem the first time,
we'll extend a courtesy service to our customers.
The customer's not happy, Comcast is not happy.
If we miss an appointment,
we'll credit you right on your bill.
Because we know your time is valuable and very important to you.
You're a customer, you deserve it. It's guaranteed.
We're only as good as our word, and our word is good.
At Comcast, we don't just believe in customer service, we guarantee it. See for yourself. Call 1-800-XFINITY.
These days, it seems the British royal family is a non-stop soap opera of petty rivalries, naughty scandals, and epic tragedy. The spectacle is of little consequence to most Americans. Of course, there was a time when the royals actually mattered. A time when Americans were British subjects, and no one was more devoted to the British crown than our own Benjamin Franklin.
He felt that the British Empire, politically speaking, was the best thing going. It afforded the greatest protection for rights, the greatest scope for individual ambitions and opportunities. Franklin eventually would be forced to change his mind, but it would require a real identity crisis in Franklin.
Ben's evolution from royalist to rebel would play out over some 30 years and mirror the changes that shaped America. From the 1740s to the early 1760s, Ben and his fellow colonists were staunchly British, fighting a common battle against France and its Indian allies in the wilds of North America. The conflicts culminated in what is known today as the French and Indian War. When French raiders penetrate to within 50 miles of Philadelphia, Franklin raises a militia to defend British interests. Later, he and his son William restore British control to frontier towns decimated by Indian attacks.
You don't think of Franklin as a military guy. But in the 1750s, when the Indians are terrorized, he and William go off to the frontier, and with this voluntary militia, they help build a line of forts that try to protect Pennsylvania from the marauding Indians.
In 1757, Franklin left the simmering conflict for London. He had been selected as the agent, or lobbyist, representing Pennsylvania's assembly before Parliament. In addition to his official duties, Ben had personal business to attend to, business befitting a prominent citizen of the British Empire.
Franklin was very serious about getting a land grant in the West, and he brought together a lot of powerful political leaders and bankers of London into a syndicate that was going to try to get a land grant. So, as usual with Franklin, there's all sorts of interrelated and conflicting interests as he goes about his business.
Once in England, Franklin would even seek a post as Undersecretary of a British ministry. Larger events would force him to reconsider his allegiance. The catalyst was the end of the French and Indian War in 1763. Britain had won, but its treasury was depleted.
The British had spent a lot of money defending the colonies in the French and Indian War, so they wanted to raise some taxes in order to pay for it. The Americans understood the need to help pay for these wars, but they wanted the right to impose their own taxes instead of having the Parliament in England impose the taxes.
The Stamp Act, passed in 1765, required Americans to pay taxes on just about every scrap of paper they used, from playing cards to court documents and newspapers. Franklin opposed the measure in principle, but did little to lobby against its passage.
At times, he wasn't fully aggressive enough. He didn't oppose the Stamp Act strongly enough for his constituents back in Pennsylvania because he saw himself as a loyal subject. He wanted a royal appointment. He wanted the land grant. And that, in some ways, helped separate him from the more radical sentiment back in the colonies.
The Stamp Act was greeted with outright violence, with acts of, well, what other people might call political terrorism. The stamp agents were in some cases tarred and feathered. The supporters of the British government had their houses torn down, and they themselves were sometimes ridden out of town on a rail. Franklin found himself caught out on the wrong foot here.
In America, Franklin's reputation plummeted. One political cartoon even depicted him as an agent of the devil.
Now, he quickly had to try to align himself a little bit more with what the position in America was, if only to be an effective mediator between the Americans and the British. But he still believed that reason could bring the two sides back together, because he thought it would be a tremendous shame and a great loss to Americans, to the British, to the world at large, if the British Empire fell apart.
On February 13, 1766, Franklin appears before Parliament and argues forcefully against the Stamp Act. 9 days later, Parliament rescinds the measure.
His testimony against the Stamp Act was the single most important thing that convinced the English government that it had to repeal the act. It also was the single most important thing to making Franklin the premier spokesman for the colonies and restoring his reputation back in America.
The Stamp Act episode left Franklin questioning his loyalties to England. Those doubts increased when Parliament instituted new taxes on the colonies.
The real issue was that in London, the colonies were perceived as subservient economically and politically. They were second-class citizens. They couldn't have their own manufacturing. They couldn't have their own power to tax without London's permission. And that was destined to cause a breach.
What began as a breach escalated into a disaster. On March 5, 1770, British soldiers gunned down 5 Americans during a sudden explosive street battle, the infamous Boston Massacre. Franklin was outraged, but he still believed relations between Britain and America could be saved. To continue his role as mediator, he accepted an offer to serve as agent for the Massachusetts Assembly, the motherlode of American defiance.
So he gets dragged in a radical direction by Samuel Adams and John Adams and the other leaders of the Massachusetts Assembly, and he also has to satisfy his Pennsylvania constituents as well. So he's trying to hold things together, but it becomes more and more difficult.
In late 1772, Franklin began to play a high-stakes game. He would crank up the political heat, but only against a limited political target, Thomas Hutchinson, Royal Governor of Massachusetts. Hutchinson and his lieutenant governor were bitter enemies of the Massachusetts Assembly. By means that still remains something of a mystery, Franklin obtained letters written by Hutchinson. In at least one, the governor urged Britain to curtail American liberties. Franklin sent the letters to an ally in Massachusetts.
What was his point? His point was to show that the laws that had been passed that seemed to infringe on the rights of Americans were not part of a grand conspiracy, but simply the work of a few bad apples.
What Franklin did was he took these letters and made them public, just the way Daniel Ellsberg, released the Pentagon Papers. It was trying to show what the government is doing. By opening up what the government was doing, it was going to explain things.
He hoped that the king would recall these officials, and that would allow the Americans, especially Massachusetts, but other radicals in America, to recognize, or at least to say, that, okay, now we can essentially kiss and make up.
And as with the Pentagon Papers, it erupts into a huge scandal.
In London, Franklin found himself at the center of the storm. He was summoned to appear before the Privy Council, the king's highest-ranking advisors.
Just before Franklin arrives in the Privy Council, news of The Boston Tea Party arrives in London. And so now Franklin becomes, in essence, the scapegoat for all of the sins of the Americans over the last 10 years. The Stamp Act riots, everything leading up to this recent riot and destruction.
January 29th, 1774. Benjamin Franklin stands before the Privy Council in a hall known as the Cockpit, once a stage for bloody cockfights. The galleries are filled with members of Parliament and other dignitaries, most antagonistic to Franklin. Alexander Wedderburn, Solicitor General, speaks for Britain. He dresses down Franklin as he might a teenaged pickpocket.
And Franklin is realizing, I think now for the first time at a really personal level, the political has become personal. And Franklin must have been thinking, I'm always going to be treated as a second-class person simply because I'm an American. And as I see it, Franklin walked into the cockpit on that January morning in 1774, a Briton, and he walked out an American.
Franklin returned to Pennsylvania in time to help draft the Declaration of Independence. He had been a British subject for 70 years. Now, he declared himself an American.
This is a man who's committed to the British Empire, and several years later is completely committed to American independence. I don't think that there was anything wrong about that. I think the difference is that Franklin actually remains a thinking man, and thinking men find their ideas evolve and change.
Independence would require battling the greatest superpower on the face of the planet. But the United States had few weapons and little money. So Congress turned to the man who had plucked lightning from the heavens and asked him to perform another miracle, convince the King of France to bankroll the American Revolution.
Which university was founded to provide quality education to more Americans, including the 70% of today's students that are working while they earn a degree? Which university is within 10 miles of 87 million Americans and is also available to you online with no commute? Which university assigns you 3 advisors to help balance your studies and your life? University of Phoenix, because an educated world is a better world.
You're special. Magic even. That's right.
What's it like to go through life with a face like that? Let me show you.
Jonah Hex.
Always laugh when you show up.
Rated PG-13.
Desperate for nighttime heartburn relief? For many, Nexium helps relieve heartburn symptoms caused by acid reflux disease. And for the majority of patients with prescription coverage for Nexium, it can cost $30 or less per month. Headache, diarrhea, and abdominal pain are possible side effects of Nexium. Other serious stomach conditions may still exist. Ask your doctor if Nexium can help relieve your heartburn symptoms. If you can't afford your medication, AstraZeneca may be able to help.
How about turning a ceiling into a sound system? Making a world of wires disappear and fixing whatever's rough around the edges. All with one tool. Meet the new Dremel Trio. It's only $99 and it's only at the Home Depot.
The Dremel Trio is a new twist on an old favorite. This revolutionary new tool cuts, sands, routes, and it does it all with precision. Call or go online now to get yours with accessories, shipped free. You'll love how the Dremel Trio plunges right in and keeps on cutting with the same bit. This pivoting handle attacks tough angles, and this telescoping foot keeps you in control. It's perfect for sanding and routing those little details. And say you need a circle or an ultra straight line. Just attach this guide, done. The new Dremel Trio is just $99. To get yours with accessories, shipped free, call now, go online, or find it exclusively at the Home Depot.
More saving, more doing. That's the power of the Home Depot.
I'm going to tell you a little government secret. If you're disabled and you can't work anymore, you may be eligible for Social Security benefits right now. Call 1-800-66-BINDER. Your benefits shouldn't be a government secret.
We're in the mood for baby back ribs for dinner tonight. Who's got them? And it has to be all you can eat.
Thanks for dropping by.
Golden Corral is the first ever to offer all the fall-off-the-bone baby back ribs you want, all on our endless dinner buffet for around $10. Only at Golden Corral.
Shell is helping to deliver cleaner-burning natural gas to more countries than any other energy company, providing the energy Riku needs to practice his talent. That's when Mr. Ohashi allows it. Let's provide energy for the next generation. Let's go.
The internet was developed out of fear of a Cold War nuclear attack in the 1960s. Now, we can't live without it. Modern Marvels counts down its top 10 tech innovations. Tonight at 9 on History. Made every day.
Guns, ammunition.